Hey guys, before we jump into today's episode, I am so honored to share with you small clips of each guest that we had on this series and what the experience was like for them to be on the podcast, but more importantly, what the experience was like for them to dive deep into how God made them, particularly how they process loss and trauma. So our Enneagram type 1 was represented by my friend and author, Becky Wade. Here's what Becky said when I asked her how the experience of being on the podcast was for her.
I am not someone who tends to be very self-reflective, and so it was great for me just to spend some time thinking about how my personality can lead to some negative patterns and also the wonderful aspects of my personality and how I can roll with those. And so the discussion that we had was validating and it was enlightening because it helped me understand myself better and just encouraged me to take time to really think about how I am and how I respond and how I react and how I'm gifted.
So type 2 was yours truly, and on the day that we recorded that podcast was a difficult day for me. But in terms of how the experience was for me getting on and talking about how trauma and the Enneagram have really kind of fit like a hand in glove for me was, again, validating, getting behind a microphone and speaking to other twos and helping them understand that they must take care of themselves before they can take care of other people, and really evaluating why I do the things I do and why I am like I am, and looking into those motives and paying attention to that core fear of being unwanted and unloved, and then more importantly, understanding why, having realized those fears and trauma, why it affected me as it did. Katie Gantert was our type 3. Katie is also a friend and author, and here's what she had to say when I asked her what her experience of being on the podcast and exploring the Enneagram and loss and trauma was like for her.
Absolutely loved the experience. I could talk Enneagram all day, and I could talk to you all day. So double bonus. And, the Enneagram is such a useful tool when it comes to better understanding ourselves. And it's always so insightful to dig deeper into what makes us tick and why we might be functioning or thinking or operating in the ways that we are. I think doing the podcast interview gave me a chance to do a personal check-in. So just kind of diving deeper into what's functional and what's dysfunctional right now, what's healthy and what's unhealthy, what's helpful and what's harmful. And then my favorite was just what lies might I be believing and what truth do I need to embrace? So I think digging deeper into trauma and the Enneagram 3 gave me the opportunity to check in on all of those fronts and have a lot of fun along the way.
Type 4 was a podcast listener, now friend, and her name is Rachel Odom. And when I asked Rachel what her experience of being on the podcast was, this is what she sent to me.
Coming on the podcast brought something to my healing process that I had no idea I needed. I think most 4s would agree with me. It's really hard to articulate such big feelings a lot of the time. I knew there were wounds and I knew how I felt as a result of them, but knowing that I'd have to share those feelings with others gave me the nudge I needed to do the work to learn how to articulate clearly. And I think articulation can bring a new level of understanding. And that understanding, paired with the truth of God's word that's spoken on this podcast, helps you sift through and learn to rebuke the lies that you've learned to believe about yourself.
Our type 5 was Sophia Walsh, who also is a childhood cancer survivor. And so what she brought to the podcast was invaluable, to be honest with you. And so here is her response when I asked her what her experience of being on the podcast was like.
If I were to take one thing I think the feeling of you are not alone is just really what's standing out to me. And it's really cliche. You know, I feel like when somebody's dealing with a mental illness or anything really that's difficult and you don't know how to process it at first, it's like, okay, well, remember you're not alone. Remember I'm always here for you and all that stuff. And a lot of people do mean it genuinely, but like with the Enneagram, it's an actual tool to remind you that you are legitimately not alone. Like there are crazy people who have to research, you know, crazy other fives out there who think the same way that I do. And my specific journey, cancer is really isolating, right? Like nobody except for other cancer survivors can really relate to a lot of the experiences that I've had, even at such a young age. And so I think one thing that the Enneagram has helped me to do is to really focus in on the fact that I am not alone, and I always have a tool to lean on when I don't know where to go next.
And so our Enneagram 6 was none other than our resident co-host, Crissy Loughridge. And this was interesting because as I walked with Crissy through this, I was really interested to hear her response when I asked her what the experience of being on the podcast was like for her. And here's what she had to say.
I struggled at first learning about my type 6ness, but being on the podcast and talking through my strengths and weaknesses has led me to a greater understanding of myself and the ability to give myself some grace. And that has been really, really helpful. And hopefully I'm giving the people around me more grace as I've learned about the other Enneagram types.
And so then that brings us to our type 7, who is a good friend of mine and also a podcast listener. Angie D is what we call her. And this is what Angie had to say when I asked her about her experience on the podcast.
So what I learned about, more about trauma and about how I was made, which God made me, I fall into the Enneagram 7. One was just how important it is to sit with the pain. That's what I was on the podcast to talk about. If you've been through trauma, how important it is to work through that and to sit through the pain and work that out. And I knew that. That's what I was on the podcast for. But just to even repeat my story and what I did and also to dialogue about it with you two just really helped bring that to light even more. And it also really helped to know that one of the core fears of the Enneagram 7 is kind of to sit with pain. So it really helped to know that is also how I was made in addition to the trauma. And so it is extra hard for me to do that. And I did it, but I need to continue to work on that. It's going to be a constant battle. So I think those are the two things that I learned there more about how I was made, which was the Enneagram 7, and about trauma.
And so then our Enneagram 8 was one of the people that will be on this recap episode, Jennifer Dunlap. And when I asked Jenny, as I call her, what the experience was like for her to be on the podcast, this is what she sent me.
Being a guest on the podcast and being able to share kind of collective or universal common themes among people who kind of identify with the same number as me was incredibly helpful, but also being able to, in one place, for maybe the first time in a while, succinctly try to share my story, made it more personal to me. So there were two parts. There was a part where I felt like I was connecting with people who could maybe understand me, which isn't something I always feel, but then also being able to share something personally in a space that I felt was safe has really given me, I feel like, a lot of room to try and want to heal in an even greater way going forward. There aren't a lot of times where you can say, this is what, the last several years of life have been like for me. And sometimes when we have traumas, they come in little bits, one thing at a time, one thing here, one thing there. and we feel like maybe we can handle them. But when we look back at all of it collectively, at least for me, when I looked back and was able to talk about my story over the last few years, it felt like I could really notice there was an impact of several different things that had happened in my life that made me have a traumatic response to those things. I think the realization of that, being able to see it collectively for what it was, has made me want to try, I wouldn't say try, but lean even harder into the process of healing. Another great thing that came out of sharing on the podcast is because for me, it's hard to be vulnerable. This was the first time a lot of people really close to me, friends and family, heard a lot about like what life has been like for me. And because they're such sweet and good people that I'm surrounded by, the response from them has been so encouraging and so helpful to say, you know, they're really glad that I shared. It helped them understand me a little bit better. And that just spurs me on to want to do the same for other people. Listen to their stories, want to understand where they're coming from, and meet them in a way that really speaks to the way that God has made them. It's just really been a gift.
And so for then our type 9, our peacekeeper, I pulled one of my really good friends completely out of her comfort zone. And this is what she had to say to me when I asked her what being on the podcast was like for her.
One of the things that I struggle with is being able to figure out what my own thoughts and feelings are about certain situations. So our discussion about how God made me gave me permission to examine why in a way that I don't often do. It also allowed me to see that when I'm not healthy, I'm limiting how God can best use me and grow me. Working through the questions reminded me that my thoughts and feelings do matter, and expressing them is crucial to being able to process through times of stress and trauma. It also served as confirmation that sharing my voice can help others.
And there you have it. Those are the 9 people that were on the podcast as we spent a half a season talking about trauma and the Enneagram and how we can use how God made us to help us understand and process trauma. So I hope that you will enjoy this recap episode of all 9 episodes with my co-host Crissy Loughridge, and then we asked Jennifer Dunlap to come back. It is so rich, and if you've not heard the episodes, perhaps you will hear something in this episode that'll make you want to go back and listen to any given Enneagram type. Again, as I've always said, I do not believe that the Enneagram is the end-all, but when we take a gospel-centered approach, it can be helpful to us, and that is why I spent 9 episodes, 12 if you count all the ones before and after, talking about trauma and the Enneagram. So let's step into this conversation with my friends, Crissy Loughridge and Jennifer Dunlap. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Donor-Supported Wednesdays with Watson podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who help us with our mission here. And that mission is simple. It is to provide hope and help and resources for those struggling with PTSD or any of its friends. We have a mission on this podcast, and that mission also includes to fund pro bono counseling for those who can't afford it. If you'd like to support our mission, click on that Contact Amy button in the show notes. While you're there, I really would love it if you would subscribe, rate, or review the podcast. This is a big deal as it allows podcasts to get out to more people. Today's episode actually got added to the schedule as we are at the end of our focus of the ACE in this season, Trauma, Spaces, Places, and ACEs, as we have taken a deep dive into the Enneagram and how trauma operates inside how we are made. Next week, though, we'll step into the next half of the season as we dive into trauma in the home with a particular highlight on childhood trauma. If you've experienced trauma in the home, especially as a child, or love someone who has, you're going to want to tune in as we share a few stories of hope and help, as well as 3 episodes with professionals, including the season finale with Dr. Thomas Pettit. So that's coming in 2 weeks. So again, make sure you are subscribed. And now that we got all of that out of the way, let's step into the healing zone. As I mentioned, today's episode is a bonus episode. I knew that the Enneagram series would be popular, but we didn't know how much it would resonate with so many of you. One of the linchpins of this podcast is the importance of community. We curated 9 episodes for this series, as well as an interview with each Enneagram type, as well as an interview with my Enneagram coach, Crissy Harrison. Every single one of those direct links will be in the show notes. But as the season went on and as the series began to really resonate and sit in the hearts of people, I knew that we probably needed to add one more episode. So today I have asked Crissy Loughridge. Hey, Crissy, what's going on?
Hey, it's good to be here.
By the way, just for side note, when we try to transcribe your last name, we get all kinds of different things. But I have asked Crissy Loughridge and Jennifer Dunlap. Hey, Jenny, what's up?
I am so happy to be back with you two.
Yeah, so her name is Jennifer, but guys, we call her Jenny, but she is here to join us. And so we're going to do a brief overview of the season and how we were each affected by what we learned and how we are using this knowledge to live in community with people that we live with or do life with. There really isn't a way for us to unpack every episode, and we'll not do that, but we will introduce to you the concept of centers of intelligence and explore a little bit about Enneagram wings, and that'll just come up in natural conversation. So all of this is to explore how we can take better care of our own needs, as well as recognizing the unique ways other people respond to trauma, as well as provide support to those that you love. So we will start with, first up, Jenny, I would like to ask you. So we are recording this, ironically, on the day that your episode dropped as the Enneagram Type 8. And it is a powerful, powerful episode. I am curious, though, how was the experience of participating in this series for you as it pertains to our mission, which was, let's talk about how we process loss and trauma by way of how God made us in the framework of the Enneagram?
Sure. So like you said, as we're recording this, it's the same day that my episode comes out. Now, when our listeners listen to it, it'll be a couple of weeks later. But I'll go back and say that the actual experience of sitting and talking with you guys about this tool and just the way God made me and really exploring it and having to sit with myself, my strengths and weaknesses, what I love about the way God made me, but also all the pratfalls of being who I am, it was just such a healing experience for me. I can't even tell you how much it has helped me even since a few weeks ago or a few months ago when we first recorded. God has just been particularly kind in reminding me that I've explored this well with some really faithful, true friends, and that what he's revealed to me, he's going to be very kind and gracious to help me, keep growing and healing in. So that's been really important to me over the last few months since I recorded that with you. But today, since it's the day it drops, I think I told you guys before we hit record, I'm having a super duper vulnerability hangover. It is not easy to realize that, that wasn't just a really fun conversation with two good friends. It's out there for the whole world to listen to.
Seven continents. No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure.
It's been a little interesting this morning. So I'm hanging in there. I'm hanging in.
Well, we are grateful. We are grateful, and we will certainly be talking about your episode. How about you, Chris? What was the experience like for you?
Well, the being on the podcast obviously is great. It's great to talk about these things, and it's super helpful. But the actual looking into my personality type, I think because of my personality type was kind of depressing. Like all I could see is all my faults and all the things, and so it's been good as we've gone on, because then I recognize those are the lies that Satan wants me to believe, that I am only my Enneagram type. There's nothing else, and you're gonna behave that way forever because that's who you are, and you're a 6, and you're going to see the worst case scenario, and all the things, instead of the beauty of the way God has made me. And so it's been more of a not a struggle, but a journey for me to understand who I am and combat the attacks from Satan saying, that's all you'll ever be. You're broken. You're not even a good 6. you're a broken 6.
You're the worst case scenario 6.
You're your worst case scenario of yourself. And so I think that there are people out there, and I've heard several people say, I won't take the Enneagram test because I don't want to know. And I think that I fall in that category, and I it's likely they are other 6s because they don't want to know. And I think it's that fear of, I don't want to know the bad news, instead of seeing the good news of the beauty of how God has made us. And so that's been my experience and kind of still where I'm journeying.
Gotcha.
What about you, Aim?
Yeah, so before I answer that, you also got the unique perspective to be on the other side of those other 8 interviews.
Yes.
And so I can see why you're in your head comparing, like, but I don't want to be a 6. I want to be a 9, or I want to be a 7. So you got to. What was the experience like for me? You know, the day that we recorded that episode, and I did not know what questions were coming, with the exception of the couple that we did, that everybody did. But the day that we recorded that episode, and if you go back and listen to it, you can hear it in my voice. I had found out that I had a friend of a friend who had passed away as a result of COVID. And so I was feeling extremely emotional anyway. And I said things on that interview that I probably wouldn't have normally said. And one of those was, Crissy, you asked me, what do we need to know about other 2s? And when I was preparing for this, I went back and listened because I didn't remember saying this in this interview. And I said, sometimes we just need you to tell us you love us, like use the words. And suddenly I started getting text messages and stuff of people telling me that they love me. So it was a fan. So from that way, it was a really good experience. But as Jenny mentioned, I definitely had a vulnerability hangover after that. As we continue the conversation, I wanted to ask you guys if you found any of the other episodes helpful and why. And the reason why I have curated this group of people, besides the fact that we're the best of friends and 2 a.m. friends, is that each of us represent a center of intelligence. And this is an opportunity quickly for me to introduce what center of intelligence is. And so there are 3 centers of intelligence. There are some different words. So for example, the Enneagram people count weirdly, guys. And so 891 is what we call our gut center of intelligence. And so Jenny sits in the gut center of intelligence, and people who are Enneagram and type 8, 9, or 1, they typically make decisions based on sensations in their body. And so sometimes it might be a warning sign, but oftentimes they just know that they have to do something. And this is where we hear the saying, gut response. My gut response is...
And would you say that the gut, y'all tend to be pretty sure of yourselves? 8, 9s, and 1s. Jenny, would you resonate with that?
Great question.
It seemed like each of those interviews, the decision making was like, I got it. Do you feel that way, Jenny?
For sure.
Okay.
It can be probably look very impulsive to other people from the outside, especially people who think, and we'll get to the other centers of intelligence. It takes a little more time, but for us, it really is. Like you said, it's almost this internal just feeling or sensation, in your gut, or that's what drives you. And it happens pretty fast.
Well, and you said on your interview it served you well, and I think we would agree with that. One of the things that I envy about this center of intelligence, and it is important, guys, for us to try to operate in the other centers of intelligence. But one of the things, Jenny, that you said that I wish I had is you could walk into a room and size it up or size up a person. Meanwhile, I trust everybody, which leads into the heart, right? And so that is the 2, 3, 4s, and that is definitely me. We make decisions with our heart, and so this is the reason why, especially, and I can only speak for my Enneagram type, that 2s get hurt quite often, because we are the helpers, and we I'm the person that Jenny on her episode, it still makes me laugh. You're mad at the Publix commercials. I live for the Publix commercials. And for those of you around the country who don't know, Publix is a fantastic grocery store, and they have these commercials around the holidays. It's about grandma and it just Jenny's like, I don't like them to make me cry. And so yes. Meanwhile, those are the things that people that operate out of the heart do. We make decisions based on our heart. And that is a beautiful thing, but it can also not be a great thing. And again, in full transparency, we realized when we were going to do this episode that we each are in a different center of intelligence. We happen to be really good friends, and we were like, maybe that's why when we sit around a table, we have some really good conversations, because that leads us into the head, the thinking, the busy brains. Mm-hmm. And that is the 5, 6, 7. Crissy, that is you. Yeah. Do you resonate with that? Like, this is where you make decisions, is from the thought, the yes. head?
Yes. So in a conversation, it would be, Jenny would be sure. You would be emotionally attached, and I would be sitting back thinking through both of your responses and evaluating and then making a decision. So it's that all the different. So I'm the one who's going to be quiet at first, because I'm taking in everything. It makes me, I think, a good listener, because I'm taking in everything you have to say, thinking it. Our sister-in-law calls it kicking the can, kicking the can around until then my decision will be made. But it's after, and again, it goes back to, I love lots of opinions, because I want to hear from the head, the heart, the gut. I want to hear all the different options and all the different thoughts, and then make a decision. So I'm thinking all the time.
Isn't that so true about the way we have conversations, the three of us? If a question or an idea is brought up, I probably will be the first to respond to it with a synopsis of exactly how I feel about it. Amy, we sometimes can even talk over one another, because you're right on the same page with me, because you're already like emoting and like that empathing. Like, yeah. I know where you're going. I know what you're feeling. And Crissy is going to take it all in, and she'll be the first one to follow. Like, let's do a follow-up question to that then, because you've asked 6 questions in your head about what the two of us have yes. said from our gut and our heart.
Yes.
And that could go around a couple of times. And then we finally get the beautiful response, like, of Crissy's thought and response to the original question. But you, Crissy, will have circled back around with us like 2 or 3 times to clarify
yes
what we've said. And then we get to, be privy to, what you have to bring to the table. It really is something. It's great.
Yeah. Well, isn't it a beautiful picture of what Paul says about the body of Christ, and how each of us have our strengths, each the eye, the hand, the foot. And so when we talk about these centers of intelligence, that how everybody is made differently, so at those tables where we're talking about serious things as friends, we need everybody's different take and everybody's different center of intelligence, if you will. And I just think that's a beautiful picture of the way Paul talks about how every member of the church has a place in there. But that doesn't mean that we can't grow from other places. But before we go that direction, I wanted to ask you guys, so inside of your own center of intelligence, so Jenny, for you, that would have been Joy Tiffany's episode as well as Becky Wade's episode. Did you resonate with them, since you guys reside in that same center of intelligence? Was there anything in their episode that maybe another 8 out there can say, oh, wow, there's a little bit of the 1 and a little bit of the 9 that makes sense to me too? Did anything on their episodes resonate with you at all?
Definitely. So I just have to say, for Joy's episode as the 9, I want to be really transparent and say, before I took an Enneagram test and knew anything about like who I might be, I wanted so desperately to be a 9. When I found out like what each type was like, I thought, please, Lord, let me be a 9.
Let me
Please
be a
say that
9.
that's who I am, because out of all of the types, and it doesn't mean anything except for what it means to me, that seemed so desirable.
Yes.
To be the person who could see everyone's side and bring people together and be the encourager and the calm voice of reason. I don't know what I was thinking that was what I brought to the table. But listening to her was so special to me because she is those things. And so I am so drawn. Maybe it's that center of intelligence that connects us, but I am so drawn to 9s who can mediate for the rest of us. As 8s, we need that. We need people who can say, well, I think what she's saying is, or kind of soften us. And it just so naturally, I think, flows for them to help the rest of us kind of connect with one another. And she's just like, she is such a good 9. Like, even just listening to her voice was so calming. Yeah. When questions were asked, she sometimes took a beat and then answered.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is this?
Yeah. What is this taking a breath? Yeah. What is that?
Right. And then for the 1s with Becky Wade, of course, I'm just a big fan of hers in general. So to listen to her speak about, just like the way she operates in the world and uses her temperament in her profession to create such a quality product in what she writes, in the books that she writes, was so fascinating. And I needed to hear her episode because my husband, I think I said this on my podcast episode, my husband is a 1, but he's a man, and she's a woman. And for me, it's very helpful to hear from a woman's perspective some of the behind the scenes of what it's like to be a 1, so that I can understand my husband better. And that's a really important, it's like the most important relationship in my small little world, right? Is relating to the person I've chosen to do life with and love. And just her way of being able to express how important it is in her center of intelligence, in her gut, to always be right and do the right thing and do the good thing with integrity, helped me so much to understand what drives my husband to in the way that he interacts with our family. This is also so important for him. So he and I both are in the gut triad.
Yeah. So
we both come to the table with a lot of energy and a lot of force and a lot of strong opinions. And that can be explosive sometimes in a not so good way, but it helps me so much to respect where he's coming from, and that we're kind of coming from the same place. So I can really honor that in him and say how grateful I am to listen to her talk about all of these things that matter so much and are important to her are the same things that are important to someone who I do life with so intimately. It was just huge for all the other 2 episodes in my Center of Intelligence, to listen to how they approached it.
How about you, Chris? So you would have been Sophia,
5, 6, and 7,
and Angie.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wing so heavily,
and we're going to talk about wings in just a second.
And I think if I scored 3 points on the 7, so I am not fun. I'm just kidding.
That is not true.
No,
That's not true. It's not true.
You feel, again, I think that goes back to just my personality type. So I'm not a good time Charlie at all.
Right.
But it's not true. But the 7 almost feels foreign to me, even though it's in my center of intelligence. But the 5 I very much so resonate with. And so Sophia's episode, and you can hear me going back and forth with her, the spoons. I do wake up every morning grabbing my spoons and going, you may have half of one spoon and I will save the others, because who knows what fires I'm going to have to put out later. And so with my spoon, which doesn't work together. But so I definitely, that episode, that really, really helped me. And I did resonate a lot with Sophia's episode.
And I think too that the fact that both of you are thyroid cancer survivors, and so that episode was powerful. And we had two millennials on, and so for me and my center of intelligence, I would have been with author Katie Ganchert, which that was a complete riot. I also wing into the threes, and again, we're going to talk about wings in just a second. But so I wing into a 3, and so I resonated quite a bit with Katie Gancher's episode because the threes want to be seen, and so and the twos want to be wanted and loved, and so wanted, loved, and seen is a trifecta. Bingo, right? Blackjack, you won. And so, but I definitely resonated with her in the threes when she was saying that she just wants to be seen, and that has exhibited itself by way of performance. And you'll have to go back and listen to the episode because she says something very interesting about when she and Katie Ganchert, as is Becky Wade, who is in episode 1. Both of them are Christie award-winning authors, and so Katie shared something with us about actually being nominated for awards and how she really tied that to the 3. And so I definitely resonated with Katie Ganchert's episode because I want to be seen, and my whole life I have done that by performing. And to know that I am just seen because I woke up in the morning, and to proclaim that over her was also proclaiming it over me, which was kind of cool. And then Rachel Odom's episode, who represented the type 4, Rachel happens to be a friend of mine, and I guess she might put me in the mentor category for her. But I also resonated with her, and Rachel's episode was one of my favorites because it also helped me understand, because I'm a 2, and so a 2 goes to 4, which is Rachel, in health. And so as I was able to hear her talk about the healthy aspects of being a type 4, it helped me know what to look for. So before we get into wings, I'm curious for you guys. So Jenny, your growth path is a what?
2.
2.
A 2, like you.
So talk to me about whether or not that this feels a little bit awkward. Crissy probably should have asked you this question, but were you able to glean anything from my episode, since that is your growth path? And so listeners, your growth path is where you are when you're operating in health, when you're not defined by your Enneagram number, and you're really using all 9 parts of your personality. But all of us go to a number in health. I go to 4, Jenny, you go to 2, you go to me. And so did that help? Did that episode or that perspective help you at all for your growth path?
It did. It has been really helpful to even know, let's see if this makes sense. The 2s, I heard one person say one time that, like, who doesn't want to be a 2, right? The helper, the one who's always thinking about other people. Isn't it funny that, like, the grass is always greener on the other side of the hill? So many of us want what you just naturally bring to the world, which is so thinking about other people. And to think that a part of me could, become, in all of the health, in all of the ways that God refines me, someone who not only brings strength to the table in the way that I am, but, like you, just thinks so kindly and thoughtfully about the other and recognizes other people's wants and desires and is really connected to that. I think about several of you who I know who are 2s who just you just drill in and really understand other people's concerns and issues so easily that it's kind of like an aspirational thing for me. So listening to you talk about, like, loving some of the things about the way God made you is so helpful to those of us who could possibly get there too. And it just gives us something really, really cool to work towards. I mean, I'm not trying to work to, like, fit myself into your box, but just allowing, like, surrendering it to the Lord and saying, like, there is so much of every type that you have in store for me that could be beneficial to other people, but that in his goodness and grace, like, part of what I could be as a whole, person functioning in him is someone who could be so thoughtful and so kind and so heart connected to other people. I'm like, who wouldn't want that, right?
I joked and said I don't, but I do love the way God made me in that regard. But yeah, and it's interesting. I was mistyped as an 8 at one point, and that just speaks to that stress path that we talk about, and it is my second highest. So how about you, Chris? You go to 9 in health, and as it turns out, Joy happens to be a really close friend of ours. Talk to me about what you picked up from where you go in growth.
I mean, it's easy to want to be a 9.
Right.
I actually scored very, very high in the 9s already. So I can see my way into growing into a 9 because I already kind of score there. But I learned a lot from Joy about the things that are helpful and the things that harm 9s, and so it was just really, really helpful to hear like the full breadth of what it's like to score high there and want to grow in and gain that skill to be able to see everybody's perspective and really dial in there and understand where everybody's coming from.
Yeah, and when coupled with that ability to see the worst case scenario, right? So see the worst case scenario and see everybody's perspective, I can see why that would be advantageous to the way God made you for real. And same with you, Jenny, as an 8. And again, I that is my second highest as an 8. The challenger, the go-getter, we will do it if you don't. I think that when we begin to pick from the other ones, even if they're not our growth path, it's phenomenal. Which brings me to wings really quickly, because a lot of people, and again, guys, there's no way we can unpack everything on this podcast that we spent in literally 9 episodes, 18 weeks, 20 if you include the overview interview with Carissa Harrison, who we cover a bunch of this, and so you want to go back and listen to that. But wings basically is the number that is on either side of you. And so we'll start with you, Crissy. What do you think your wing is based on what you've learned through this process? I think you already mentioned it, but...
Yeah, I definitely wing 5. And so lately, I have noticed just how much I am... it feels like my 6 is bleeding 5. And because I'm super stressed out, lots of emotional as well as actual just deadline type stress, and so I'm finding myself in my head a lot, and it's been a struggle to say the least. And I feel like for me, I'm looking at my personality type and only seeing the negatives, only seeing, in essence, God made 9 types, and that's all you can be, and this is how you're going to respond, and it's not good. You're a broken 6 who's winging 5, and
you're pinging
all over the place. You don't know anything, and I'm in my head all the time, and I'm discouraged instead of seeing the beauty of the way God has made me. It's a good thing. 6s are good.
Well, and I think here, and don't let me forget to let Jenny answer this question, but I feel like I need to, every now and then, something just is impressed upon me. And I think, Crissy, that, yeah, I mean, I think that like anything else, our enemy, who doesn't want us to grow and learn and live in community, and that's such a huge reason why we did this series, is to live in the community so that we could understand how to live with other people. And so what I want to say to you is, while you're being indicted by this information, because, and some people they'll listen to their episode and they'll be like, well, that's all I am. Well, okay, well, why should I try anything else? And even if that were true, Crissy, and that's not true, because there's so much more to your personality than seeing the worst case scenario. There are so many positive aspects to the 6, and that is that ability to be curious, That is that, and when we're curious, we oftentimes don't make mistakes. You know, you and I were in a car accident right after Thanksgiving, and the fact that you're an Enneagram 6 is probably the reason why neither one of us were hurt. And so I just want to speak into you that even if what Satan is trying to tell you is true, is that you're only a 6, and you use a ping pong reference, and that, guys, is hilarious. You got to go back and listen to her talk about the ping pong story, but you use this ping pong thing, and Satan's been having a field day with you on this.
Yeah.
And the reality is that you bring such value to, I know, my life, and I think Jenny would say the same, but to the world. And so, guys, if you're out there and you're feeling like Crissy is like, I'm only a 2, or I'm only a 5, or I'm only an 8, that is not true. And when we listen to other people talk, as we did in this podcast series, you realize the breadth of what you could actually have, right? So you could have the sense of justice that the 1s have. You can be the helper that the 2s have. You can be the achiever that the 3s are. You can be the artistic, creative, beautiful, big feeling 4s. You can be the investigator of the 5s that wants to conserve their energy, because that's okay, because you get to do that. You can be a 6 because we need you to stop us from dying. You can be a 7 because we need you, especially shy and introverted people need 7s when you're out and about and doing the things. We need 8s to challenge us. We need 9s to see all perspective. Crissy, you and I had a situation back in the summer where it was, you talk about explosive, Jenny. Crissy and I have known each other for a long time, and we do life very closely together, and it was Joy who brought in that 9 perspective that healed those hurts. And so you are so much more than the ping and the pong and the 6 and the things. You are so valuable in God's sight. He made you exactly as he wanted, in his image. And I'm going to throw the words right back at you that you said on this podcast. Are you going to look at God and say, you made me as a ping pong ball? I don't like it.
No, I'm not. And that is the
point, right?
Yes. But the thing that I think really is resonating as you say all that is that God made us for fellowship.
Yeah.
And the beauty of different types of personality is that we do bring different things to the table and help encourage each other in different ways, from the heart, from the gut, from the head. It's all valuable, and we need each other.
Yes.
We need each other. God did not create just one person on the planet. That he really created us for fellowship and to help and encourage one another. And if we're not doing that,
we're getting it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, and as anybody's ever listened to this podcast knows, that that's one of our 3 C's, community. Right. And so that's why we did 9 episodes, so that we could listen to the perspective of other people, so that we could enter into life with them, so that I could go to my friend Angie, who is a 7, who has a fear of being trapped in emotional pain. And I know what to look for when I need to say, hey, come back over here to the truth and stop believing the lies. And so understanding. So Crissy, I think that's such an amazing point, and it is the point of the podcast. Jenny, where do you wing? Now, you're interesting because you said on your episode, so I think this is going to be really interesting for listeners, because you would have answered this question 2 different ways at 2 different times in your life, right? So talk to us about where you wing.
So I could either wing to 7, which is what you call the good time Charlie in Angie's episode, or to 9, which is, what I've already told you, like I desperately long to be. And I think at different times of my life, I've done both or either. Growing up and probably through my college years and into the beginning of my marriage, I definitely winged 7. I had the energy and the impulsiveness of myself and my gut added to that energetic zest for life, wanting to have fun, wanting to not be left out. What's the fear of missing out? I wanted to be part of all of the things. And so I think that was the 7 wing in me that really just loved a good experience in life and just embraced it. So when Angie had her episode and was talking about all the things she did when COVID kind of shut the world down, I had to laugh, and I love that. I love that about her. I know Angie personally, and that doesn't surprise me at all that she picked up new hobbies. She, what
Bought a
did she get? A
bike.
paddleboard,
Yeah.
bought a hammock, just learned and invested in new experiences and new things for her life. That totally would have been me at one point in my life. But now I find myself wanting calm and a mediation between people. I think I see and notice so much division, which I'm trying to understand in the world right now. And so it's having me lean more heavily and weighing more heavily into the person who just desperately wants to bring people together and understand one another. So, and I think just because of some of my health issues, I also feel like, like the energy that a 7 brings to the table is not something that I've been able to tap back into yet. So
and
it's 9 right now if I have to do something, but I think I'm pretty much at 8. Just
yeah, and I wonder if, that would be fascinating to explore at some point, because I don't think I've ever winged into a 1 a day in my life. We have a phrase called Watsonese, and that's because I just don't pay attention to detail. But Jenny, you just said something really, I just want to say this to you. It's interesting to me because you used the word mediate there. And on your episode that dropped today, the Enneagram 8, you shared with us the loss of your dad, who I never actually got the pleasure of meeting, but who served his whole career as a mediator. That was what he did as a job. And so when we talk about how God made us and the things that we get just because we were born and made in God's image, but clearly you got that a little bit from your dad, really just kind of wanting the world to be right. Now we all want the world to be right, but I think that I think that that's really interesting, and that and you really eloquently on your episode expressed how much you hate what's going on in this world right now, and I think that would be true of all of us. Well, I just want to ask you guys one more question, because obviously this is a trauma podcast, and one of the things that I never actually accounted for when I started the podcast was how much this podcast would minister to the guests that came onto the podcast. And both of you have expressed how coming onto the podcast helped you just understand other people and understand people you live with and understand you do life with. But then I just wanted, as we close the podcast, and I'll answer too, whittle it down a little bit more, but how has your understanding, and Crissy, we'll start with you on this, how has your understanding of how God made you process the trauma? And Crissy, your trauma is well documented in seasons of this podcast: shattering safety, defining safety. I think you're represented in both seasons there, where you tell us about a particularly traumatic event that you went through. But how has understanding the framework of the Enneagram helped you, if at all, and it's okay if it hasn't, process some of the traumatic events that have happened in your life, for those who listen to the podcast for that reason?
I have found that it gives me some more grace for the way I process things, but I think more it has helped me in interacting with other people that are causing trauma in my life, understanding, I bet maybe they're a 2. Like, I'm not trying to assign what they are, but maybe they're a 2, and I'm not understanding, and I'm not talking about you, obviously, Amy, but maybe that's why they're behaving this way, and it hurts me. But if I can understand where they're coming from, I have a little more grace for them as well, which then helps me not get more angry and just shut down and say, you hurt me, I'm done with you, this is too painful. So instead, I feel like I'm looking at the people around me and having more grace for other people, and trying to come alongside and say, you see life different than me. How can I see the way you see life and encourage you toward the Lord, if that all makes sense?
No,
yes.
The listeners can't see what I did to Jenny, but I just literally did the mic drop. Right, Jenny?
And if you could hear, yes. Amy's dropping the mic and I'm like shaking my head up and down so vigorously because, boy, Crissy, you just nailed it. I think that we can just use this maybe to say, maybe not everyone approaches everything the way I do.
Right.
And if we
Right?
know that,
What a concept.
then we're not assigning so much to someone else. You know, I do have people in my life who say, you must be feeling this way about a situation. And I never feel the way they think. But they're trying to ascribe to me how they would respond in that situation. And boy, isn't that like the genesis of so many misunderstandings?
Yes.
Because then they're going to treat me the way they would feel if they were in that situation. But this helps you to say, okay, wait a second. She just may not be approaching or may not have responded the same way I would to this situation. And if I know a little bit more about this person or that person, like you said, your phrase that you've used several times, Crissy, is grace upon grace upon grace. We get with this the opportunity to just equip and fill our bag with more chances to extend grace to other people that they just might not see things the way we do. Yeah. We can be so curious about the way that they do so we can respond in love and wisdom to the way they're interacting with the world.
Yeah, I don't think we give enough credit to curiosity. I don't think we realize what would happen if what Crissy just said is, as people hurt us, and this is a world where people do that, and to your point, Jenny, if we could couple what both of you guys just said together is like, okay, like for me, one of the things that upsets a two is to not feel appreciated. So like we do things and I don't want you to do anything. I don't want you to pay me. I don't want you to do anything. But every now and then saying thank you is helpful. Well, if you don't know that about me, and I get so much communication on this podcast thanking me, and that is that's what I need. And so if we don't know this about other people, we're going to hurt them. Number one, if we don't know what they need. And then number two, when people hurt us, to Crissy's point, if we understand, well, I am pretty sure that person is a two operating in unhealth. And you can literally look at the stress path go to the Enneagram Institute or Krista Harrison's website, any of it. You can look, they're acting like that, so they must be this. And it's just a different way of understanding that concept of you're going to bleed on the people that don't hurt you, right? And so I am so grateful to both of you for being here. I am grateful to a God who thought us up before the foundations of the world. And I was in a counseling session the other day with Dr. Pettit, and we were working on some inner child work, which will lead us into the next part of the podcast series. And he said, think of it this way. Think of before the foundations of the world, when God and they're just having this conversation about creating Amy Watson. And you can almost hear him say, and to Crissy, to your point, we are not our Enneagram number. We don't have one quite like this. Let's create one quite like this. Let's create one with a little bit of 2 and some 4 and maybe a little bit of 8. And then let me put them in community with a 6 and a 8 and a 1. And we called that, ladies and gentlemen, operating healthily in the body of Christ. And so if you don't know Jesus as your personal Savior, who we call the star of the story on this podcast, again, don't rate the podcast, don't follow the podcast, don't subscribe to the podcast, but do hit that contact Amy, and I would love to introduce you to the star of the story, because this is a podcast on trauma, and we know that there is no way that we can do life without understanding and knowing and loving and receiving the completed work of Jesus on the cross in our lives. That is our mission here, is to help you so that you have hope and help when times come that are too much for you. And so as we close out the podcast, I would love to give you guys some parting words. We will start with you, Crissy. Do you have any parting words for the listeners as we move into the next part of this series of trauma in the home? And we are going to have a particular focus on childhood trauma.
This has just been really, I think the whole Enneagram study has been super helpful, and I'm so grateful for this episode to just flesh out the whole thing and kind of it just reiterates to me that the beauty of the way God has made us all unique, and how we can really benefit one another and point each other toward the Lord.
How about you, Jenny? Parting words for our listeners?
I don't know that I could say it better than Crissy said it, but just to tag along with what she did say is that, and kind of what you said, as you're talking about all those different colors, numbers coming together, Amy, I thought about colors. It's just this beautiful masterpiece. And if we put ourselves into a box, and I'm pretty good at that, like I box myself sometimes into my number. And Crissy, you were talking about like some of the dangers of that for you, right? Then we miss some of the nuance, like if an 8 is red, like there's so many shades of red, right? So, and then it mixes with all the different shades of whatever color you would resonate with, and just create such a beautiful picture. And that's what God is doing through us. And we've just said it so many times, but I think it just bears repeating as many times as we can, that you are not your number. But if there's something about this series that has helped you understand yourself or feel seen and known and heard and loved and valued, all the things that are so important, then praise God for that, right? Yeah. And if there's something about this series that has made you see and know and hear better someone else in your life that you love, and you can just be a really good steward of that new information and love one another better, then it's like such a privilege to have been a part of that. And I'm so grateful that you took the risk to do this and to bring all of us on here and be vulnerable so that we can just be better community for one another in the body of Christ.
Amen.
Yeah, I don't know that I could say it better myself either. I was unsure of the series because of what Crissy basically just said. I'm afraid of being boxed into my number. So I'm so grateful that you said that. Well, as for me, it has been incredibly enriching. This all started with my own journey with my own Enneagram work. I actually invested with an Enneagram coach. I felt like it was a missing piece for me as an Enneagram 2 with trauma. And if you are an Enneagram 2 with trauma, you understand what I mean, and that you'll continue to just help other people to your own detriment. And so for that reason, I am grateful to be able to speak into the lives of people, not only other 2s, but everyone out there with trauma, and particularly in that episode where Krista talks about what our core fears are. And again, we don't have time to recap all of that, and all of the episodes will be here. That's the beautiful thing about podcasting, is that it is evergreen and it'll always be out there. And so thank you for being here today, Jenny. Thank you for being here, Crissy. You guys are one half of what I call the core 4, my 2 a.m. friends. I love both of you dearly, love doing community with you, and love doing this with you. And so, guys, as Phil Baker's podcast plays us out of the podcast, a song called Marked by You, know that is my only desire, is for not only my life to be marked by you, but to provide resources for those of you who have things standing in your way of you and the star of the story, who wants nothing more to do than to heal you from the things that hurt you. Live in community, guys, because that is the only way any of us are going to survive it. As always, thank you for spending a little time with me. I know, as I always say, that this is not something that we can get back. I am incredibly grateful. I do hope that you've enjoyed this series on trauma and the Enneagram. It is my prayer, my true desire, that you understand yourself and others, and that you will compassionately heal from trauma and allow others to do the same. In 2 weeks, as I mentioned, we move into the spaces and places of the podcast. That will begin with a rare solo episode as we begin exploring trauma in the home with a special focus on childhood trauma. That will culminate into the month of April where, yes, it will be back, 30 Days of Lost Childhood Challenge by Amy Watson on Instagram. So if you're not following me on Instagram, hit that contact button, and we will see if we can go for year 2 with no ER for the win. So again, if you haven't already subscribed while you're right there in your app, please do that. And until then, Jenny already said it, but I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it to Crissy. I'm going to say it to myself and all of you out there in podcast land listening. You are seen. You are known. You are heard. You are loved. You are valued. And until 2 weeks when we see you back here in the healing zone, let the healing continue.
Let my life glorify